They smiled in the meetings, nodded at the presentations, patted me on the back when the prototypes worked. And somewhere in between, they decided my dream didn't belong to me anymore. They told themselves it was business. They told themselves I was naive. But what Charles Griffin didn't know was that long before he made plans to steal my work, I had already set the trap, quietly, carefully, waiting for the moment when ambition would blind him and the system would bare its teeth. The day it happened started like any other. Coffee too bitter, emails too many, meetings too long. I sat in the corner of the conference room, my laptop open, SentinelNet's latest code updates ticking across the screen like the heartbeat of something alive and growing. Charles stood at the head of the table, charming and polished, spinning stories about innovation and disruption to a group of investors who nodded eagerly at every buzzword he threw out like candy. He spoke about a new age of cybersecurity, about AI that could defend itself, adapt faster than hackers could move. He spoke about my work as if he had written the first line of code himself. I watched him without blinking, without smiling, without giving him the satisfaction of thinking I didn't see. I had seen from the beginning the late-night emails requesting clarifications, the casual requests to send full architecture maps for reference, the way my access had slowly been limited under the guise of streamlining development. They thought I was too focused, too shy, too eager to notice the shifting sands under my feet. They were wrong. I wasn't naive. I was patient. 2 months earlier, when the first red flags started flaring, I embedded a failsafe deep within SentinelNet's core, a verification system tied to a single token only I possessed. If someone tried to deploy the system without it, SentinelNet would initiate lockdown. Not quietly, not discreetly, but publicly, leaving behind a trail of access logs pointing straight to the unauthorized user. Charles didn't know it. Not yet. But he was about to learn that the technology he tried to steal wasn't just smart. It was loyal, and it would never belong to him. I sat back in my chair, the buzz of the conference room fading into the background, and smiled. A real smile. Small, sharp. I wasn't here to shout. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to watch him destroy himself with his own greed. And I didn't even have to lift a finger. The meeting stretched on longer than necessary, Charles weaving bigger promises with every breath, stacking visions of global domination on a foundation built from stolen lines of my code. Investors scribbled notes, exchanged glances full of dollar signs, oblivious to the cracks already spreading under their golden plans. I sat still, hands folded neatly in my lap, nodding politely when someone caught my eye. The perfect picture of a loyal lead engineer ready to clap when summoned. But inside, I counted down the minutes. At exactly 2 a.m. clock p.m., Charles clicked the remote to launch the live demo. SentinelNet's logo flashed onto the massive projector screen, smooth and clean, exactly as designed. Charles cleared his throat, beginning the polished speech I had heard him practice a dozen times, his voice a syrupy mix of confidence and stolen conviction. The system booted perfectly, the interface lighting up with simulated attack scenarios designed to showcase SentinelNet's brilliance. Then, halfway through the third scenario, the screen froze. The simulated attacks hung suspended in mid-execution. The interface glitched once, then again. A low ripple of confusion spread across the room as Charles jabbed at the remote, trying to force the system forward. Nothing happened. Instead, a simple message appeared across the screen in bold white letters. Unauthorized deployment detected. System lockdown initiated. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Charles stammered, fingers trembling as he mashed useless buttons. The investors leaned forward, scenting blood. And then, like a slow, inevitable unraveling, the system displayed the full access log history. Destinopes, login IDs, every unauthorized action, tied neatly back to Charles Griffin himself. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Charles turned pale, then red, then something sickly between the two. He stumbled over excuses about beta glitches and technical bugs, but it was too late. The narrative had shifted. He wasn't a visionary anymore. He was a liability. The meeting adjourned faster than anyone could have predicted. Investors closed their notebooks with a decisiveness that spoke louder than any shouted accusation, gathering their briefcases and murmuring about reevaluations and due diligence as they filed out in a stream of thinly veiled disappointment. Charles stood frozen at the front of the room, the remote dangling uselessly from his hand, watching his empire crumble in real time. No one stayed behind to offer him comfort. No one even offered him a second glance. I gathered my laptop slowly, methodically, slipping it into my battered leather bag like this was just another Tuesday. No drama, no victory laps. Just the quiet satisfaction of watching someone finally realize that stealing isn't innovation. It's desperation wearing borrowed clothes. As I walked past him toward the door, Charles looked up, a flicker of something desperate flashing behind his carefully curated expression. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. I paused just long enough for our eyes to meet, holding his gaze with a calmness that made him flinch. I didn't need to say anything. Every line of code in SentinelNet spoke for me. Every sleepless night, every compromise I had refused to make, every choice to prepare instead of plead, it all spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. Outside, the afternoon sun felt sharper, the air fresher. I walked slowly, letting the city bustle around me without rushing to keep pace. Somewhere behind me, Titan Tech's glass tower shimmered, beautiful and hollow, a monument to ambition built on the foundation of someone else's dreams. It was no longer my burden to carry. My future wasn't trapped behind that glass. It was ahead, sprawling and untamed, waiting for hands like mine to shape it without permission or apology. I stopped at a small coffee shop on the corner, ordered a black coffee, and sank into a worn leather chair by the window. I pulled out my laptop, opened a new folder, and typed 3 words at the top of a blank document. Carter Technologies, Founding Charter. No fireworks, no grand declarations. Just the first step toward building something they could never steal. The next few weeks passed in a blur of quiet momentum. I filed the paperwork for Carter Technologies, a small LLC with a big idea, and reached out to a handful of former colleagues who had drifted away from Titan Tech when the cracks first started to show. Some were cautious, some curious, but a few responded with a spark in their eyes, the same hunger I had nursed through endless nights of writing code no one else believed could work. We met in coffee shops and tiny rented spaces, scribbling ideas on napkins, arguing over algorithms, dreaming wide and wild without asking permission. Meanwhile, Titan Tech began to crumble from the inside out. Rumors of internal audits circulated quietly through the tech community. Several key investors pulled out, citing ethical concerns and leadership mismanagement. The news broke a month after the disastrous pitch. Charles Griffin stepped down to pursue new opportunities, his departure wrapped in the sterile language of PR firms desperately trying to staunch the bleeding. But no one believed the spin. People knew. And reputations, once cracked, shatter faster than glass. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I barely even followed the headlines. Because real revenge, I had learned, wasn't in watching someone fall. It was in building a life so solid they could never shake it again. Carter Technologies grew in the shadows at first, quietly assembling a prototype more advanced than anything Titan Tech had dared dream. We stripped SentinelNet down to its bones, rebuilt it smarter, faster, more ethical. I insisted every line of code, every system vulnerability patch, every deployment strategy be double-blind tested by independent teams. Transparency wasn't just a feature, it was the foundation. I wouldn't let ambition rot the roots of what we built. In March, we secured our first major contract, an AI defense system for a mid-sized cybersecurity firm based on the East Coast. It wasn't a glamorous deal, it didn't make headlines, but it was clean, honest, ours. And when the check cleared, when I saw the company name next to mine on the payment order, I sat alone in my kitchen and allowed myself a long, slow breath of something dangerously close to pride. I moved into a small loft downtown, close enough to walk to the office, far enough from the glass towers that used to make my stomach clench. The floors creaked and the pipes rattled when the heat kicked in, but it had wide windows that caught the morning sun, and a kitchen just big enough for midnight coffee marathons. I filled the shelves with books and old vinyl records, the walls with framed prints of the constellations I had memorized as a kid, back when dreams felt safer mapped out in the stars than on Earth. Sometimes I still thought about Titan Tech, about Charles Griffin, about the years I spent trying to earn a seat at a table they had never intended to share. But the thoughts passed quickly now, like distant storms on the horizon, loud but powerless to reach me. I didn't hate them. I didn't pity them. I simply understood that some stories aren't meant to be rewritten. They're meant to be left behind. One evening, after a late meeting finalizing a partnership with another AI security firm, I walked home under a sky bruised purple and gold, the city humming low around me. I stopped by the river, watched the reflections shiver and stretch across the black water, and let myself feel it, really feel it, for the first time. Pride, relief, freedom. I had built something no one could steal. Not because it was invincible, not because it was perfect, but because this time it was built with my hands, my heart, my name written in every stubborn, brilliant corner. I didn't need a crowd to witness it. I didn't need the ones who had doubted me to come knocking with apologies, too little, too late. I needed only this, the knowledge that I had survived the fire, walked through the ashes, and started again, without waiting for someone to hand me permission. And I wasn't done building, yet. Spring crept in slowly, the city shaking off winter with tentative breezes and pale green shoots peeking through sidewalk cracks. Carter Technologies moved into a real office space, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and creaky wooden floors that smelled like ambition and old coffee. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Every chipped window frame, every stubborn pipe, every echoing footstep across the open space felt like a declaration that we had survived and refused to apologize for it. The team grew carefully, deliberately. I didn't hire resumes, I hired resilience, people who knew what it meant to rebuild without permission, to craft excellence from the overlooked pieces others discarded. We coded late into the night, fueled by takeout and cheap energy drinks, chasing ideas that sounded impossible until we dragged them, kicking and screaming, into reality. Every success tasted sweeter because it was fought for. Every failure stung less because it was shared honestly. Meanwhile, whispers about Titan Tech continued to trickle through the industry. Lawsuits over misappropriated IP, former executives scrambling for new homes in companies wary of association. Charles Griffin resurfaced briefly in a new startup pitch deck, but the investors I now called colleagues passed his name over with thin, humorless smiles. The tech world, for all its bluster about innovation, remembered betrayal longer than brilliance. I didn't chase those rumors. I didn't gloat. I stayed focused, because the real victory wasn't in watching them fall. It was in knowing I no longer measured my worth by the ruins they left behind. One afternoon, we secured a government contract, small, preliminary, but monumental for a company less than a year old. When the email came through confirming the deal, I stared at it for a long time, heart thudding slow and heavy against my ribs. I forwarded it to the team, watched the cheers explode in our group chat, then leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. We weren't a maybe anymore. We weren't a footnote. We were here, and no one was taking this from us. The weeks after the contract win moved fast, each day stitched together with strategy meetings, coding sprints, and late-night phone calls where laughter and exhaustion blurred into something almost holy. We grew stronger, not because we were fearless, but because we weren't afraid to admit when we didn't know something, and stubborn enough to figure it out anyway. Every new client that signed with us wasn't just a business transaction. It was a small, defiant anthem echoing that we belonged here, whether the old guard acknowledged it or not. I spent most mornings on the rooftop of our office, coffee in hand, watching the sun claw its way over the skyline like it had something to prove. I understood that hunger now, that refusal to rise politely. Some mornings, I replayed the moment when Charles clicked through the lockdown error, his face unraveling in real time. But mostly, I thought about what came after. The quiet persistence of building a world where my name, my work and my voice could exist without apology. In May, we hosted our first community tech workshop, teaching high school students about ethical AI and cybersecurity. I stood in front of a room full of bright-eyed teenagers, trying to hide how much it meant to me to see them scribbling notes, asking questions, daring to imagine futures bigger than anything Titan Tech had ever taught me was allowed. After the session, a girl no older than 16 cornered me near the snack table, notebook clutched to her chest, and said, "I didn't know someone like me could do this." I smiled, feeling the truth crack open something old and brittle inside my ribs. "You can," I said. "You absolutely can." That night, walking home under a sky buzzing with summer electricity, I realized how much I had changed. Not just the job titles or the paychecks or the addresses. The marrow-deep certainty that I didn't need anyone's permission to exist loudly in spaces they once tried to lock me out of. That survival wasn't just breathing, it was building something bigger than the betrayal. And we were just getting started. The summer pushed forward in a breathless sprint, heat shimmering off sidewalks, deadlines stacking like building blocks, daring us to climb higher. Carter Technologies signed 2 more contracts by July, one with a nonprofit fighting for digital rights, another with a mid-tier healthcare company desperate for better patient data protection. We weren't flashy. We didn't throw launch parties or chase glossy magazine features. We built quietly, like roots threading deep under concrete, invisible but inevitable. I spent less time thinking about Titan Tech with each passing week. Their name became just another cautionary tale whispered across tech meetups and entrepreneurship forums. The warning was always the same: protect your work or someone else will write your name out of it. I didn't correct them when they got the story wrong. I didn't remind anyone that sometimes, if you're careful, if you're patient, you can build safeguards that shout the truth louder than any courtroom ever could. Late one evening, after the team had long since gone home and the office lights flickered low, I sat alone by the whiteboard, tracing designs for our next project. Sir Whiskerton, who had somehow adopted the office as his second home, curled up on my jacket nearby, snoring softly. I sipped cold coffee and listened to the city outside breathing, pulsing with the kind of restless energy I used to mistake for ambition when I was younger and hungrier. Sophia texted that night for the first time in months. "Proud of you, always have been, just didn't say it enough." Simple, clumsy, honest. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not sad, not angry, just still. Then I tucked the phone into my bag and turned back to the whiteboard, letting the future pull me forward without needing to anchor it to the past anymore. Some ties aren't severed by explosions. Some just fray until one day you realize you're free and the world didn't end when you let go. Outside, the first hint of autumn brushed the air, cool and daring, whispering of changes not yet seen, but already moving under the surface. I smiled, cracked my knuckles, and kept building. By early September, the team had outgrown the old warehouse office, the creaking pipes and cracked windows becoming more charming than practical. We signed a lease on a new space, a modest suite in a renovated brick building downtown, filled with sunlight and the smell of new beginnings. Moving day was chaos in the best way. Laptops balanced precariously on towers of file boxes, mismatched mugs clinking in recycled grocery bags, someone blasting an old rock playlist from a Bluetooth speaker. We celebrated with dollar pizza slices eaten sitting cross-legged on the dusty hardwood floors, laughing louder than we probably should have, our voices echoing off the high ceilings like a promise. I stood back for a moment, watching them. My people, my team, and felt a surge of something so fierce and proud it nearly knocked me off balance. We had built this. No headlines, no stolen credits, no corner cutting or shortcuts or stolen dreams, just sweat and stubbornness and the quiet, relentless refusal to quit. That night, after everyone stumbled home still laughing, I lingered in the new office. I plugged in my laptop at the corner desk by the window, pulled out an old notebook, and started sketching out the next phase. I thought about every door that had slammed in my face, every name that had once made my heart clench, Every night I sat wondering if all this fighting would ever amount to anything more than bruises. And then I thought about today. The laughter, the sunlight, the new walls we could paint whatever color we wanted. And I smiled. Not the kind of smile you force for photographs. Not the brittle kind you wear when pretending you're fine. But a real one. Rooted and heavy and sure. I didn't text Sophia back. I didn't call my parents. I didn't send a message to the world demanding it notice. I just stayed there for a while, breathing in the dust and hope and possibility, letting it settle into my skin, letting it remind me of something I had almost forgotten. I hadn't just survived, I had rebuilt. And this time, the foundation was unshakable. Fall sharpened everything, the air crisper, the sky bluer, the days shorter and sweeter in their scarcity. Carter Technologies launched our second product line that October, a modular security platform designed to scale with companies instead of boxing them into one-size-fits-all models. It wasn't sexy like some flashier AI projects clogging up the news feeds, but it worked. Quietly, reliably, ethically, and it made noise where it mattered most. Inside boardrooms where the old guards whispered our name with grudging respect. I didn't chase headlines. I didn't sit for glossy interviews painting me as a phoenix rising from corporate ashes. I didn't need to. The people who mattered, the clients signing contracts, the students filling our internship programs, the communities we invested back into, they saw us. That was enough. The recognition came slower, quieter, but it came without compromise, and it stayed because it was built on more than smoke and mirrors. One night, working late, I came across an article buried deep in a niche tech journal. Titan Tech's remaining leadership had filed for bankruptcy. Charles Griffin's new venture collapsed under a lawsuit alleging intellectual property theft. I read it once, twice, waiting for the old surge of bitterness, the hunger for validation, the craving to stand atop their ruins and scream that they had underestimated me, but it didn't come. I closed the article, shut down my laptop, and sat back in my chair, staring out at the city blinking steadily beyond the window. I thought about the version of me who once believed success meant forcing the world to acknowledge your scars, to clap for your survival. I thought about how many nights I'd spent dreaming of revenge, served cold and glorious. And then I smiled, small and sure, because none of that mattered anymore. The real triumph wasn't Titan Tech's fall. It was that I no longer needed their failure to validate my success. Outside, the first leaves rattled down the empty street, chasing each other in frantic spirals. Somewhere, Sir Whiskerton snored from his nest on the battered office couch, blissfully indifferent to the human dramas playing out beyond his realm. I sipped cold coffee and made a note to order new window signage for our second anniversary. Not because we needed the world to notice, but because we had earned the right to take up space without apology. And this time, we would. The second anniversary of Carter Technologies came and went without much ceremony, just the way we liked it. We ordered pizza, uncorked a few bottles of cheap wine, and toasted in mismatched mugs and coffee cups, our laughter filling the office like music. No media crews, no hashtags trending online, just a handful of stubborn dreamers celebrating the improbable fact that we were still standing, still growing, still writing our own story, page by messy page. Sophia sent another text that night, a photo of an old locket I had lost years ago, tucked into a dusty drawer at my parents' house. Found this. Thought you might want it back. No questions, no demands, just a small offering, as if trying to stitch a thread back across the widening river between us. I didn't reply right away. I tucked the phone into my pocket and went back to the celebration, the warmth of my team's chatter wrapping around me like armor. I thought about the girl who had once worn that locket, who had believed that loyalty and family were the same thing, who had twisted herself smaller and smaller trying to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold her dreams. I wasn't that girl anymore, and maybe Sophia wasn't the sister she once was either. Maybe we could build something new, quieter, gentler. Or maybe not. Either way, it would have to be built honestly this time. Or not at all. When the party ended and the office emptied out, I walked home through streets dusted with fallen leaves, the city breathing slow and sleepy around me. I slipped the locket into my jacket pocket, felt its weight settle against my ribs, and smiled. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded me that some things lost aren't meant to be mourned. They're meant to be found again, reshaped by hands that know better now. At home, I stood by the window, watching the first real frost crawl across the glass, and thought about how survival isn't a singular event. It's a choice you make every morning when you open your eyes. A vow you whisper to yourself when no one else is listening. And every day, without fail, I chose to stay standing. Winter settled hard that year, heavy and unapologetic, turning the streets brittle and the nights longer than I remembered. Work stayed steady, contracts renewing, new clients trickling in, and the office humming with the kind of quiet purpose that made me grateful every time I walked through the door. Success, I realized, didn't feel like fireworks or standing ovations. It felt like stability. It felt like laughter over bad coffee, like slow progress logged in spreadsheets, like the way the team grumbled about overtime but stayed anyway because the work mattered. One evening, as snow thickened against the windows and the office dimmed to a golden hush, I got an unexpected email. An invitation to speak at a national tech summit about resilience in innovation. A panel highlighting leaders who had survived upheaval and built something new. I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keys, feeling the old reflex rise in my chest, the one that said, "Not you, someone else, someone louder, shinier." But I wasn't that girl anymore. I had learned how to take up space, even if my voice still shook sometimes when I spoke. I accepted the invitation before fear could second-guess me, closed the laptop, and leaned back in my chair, letting the future crack open just a little wider. I thought about all the doors that had closed in my face, all the rooms I had once begged to be allowed into, and I realized I wasn't knocking anymore. I was building different rooms, better ones. When I told the team about the summit, they exploded in cheers and high fives, louder than any applause I had ever dreamed of. Someone stuck a paper crown on my head made from old printer paper, and Sir Whiskerton hissed at the commotion like a disapproving chaperone. I laughed until my sides hurt, until the fear loosened its grip and wonder settled in its place, sticky and bright. That night, walking home with the cold sharp against my cheeks and the crown crumpled in my jacket pocket, I whispered a promise to the dark sky above. I would not waste this chance. I would not shrink to make others comfortable. I would not apologize for building something they said I couldn't. Not anymore. The summit came quicker than I expected, a whirlwind of flights and press badges and unfamiliar hotel corridors that smelled faintly of ambition and coffee grounds. I stood backstage in a black blazer that still felt a little too stiff, clutching my notes like a shield, heart thudding in a rhythm I hadn't been able to slow since dawn. Across the stage, banners screamed slogans about innovation and disruption, all polished metal and neon lights. When they called my name, the applause rose, polite and expectant, a wall of noise that didn't quite touch me as I walked onto the stage. I took a deep breath, found my mark under the harsh spotlight, and began to speak. Not from a script, not from the sanitized version of the story that smoothed out the betrayal and blurred the bruises, but from the marrow-deep truth of what it means to survive ambition, weaponized against you. I talked about building from ruins. I talked about choosing patience over spectacle. I talked about what it meant to build something ethical, something that didn't just chase profit, but honored the dreams it was born from. And somewhere between the words and the breathless silence that followed them, I realized I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for her. The version of me who had once sat behind glass walls, wondering if she would ever be more than a footnote. When I finished, the applause was real, rising not like an obligation, but like a wave breaking against the shore. I stepped off stage lightheaded, blinking back the sting in my eyes, and found myself face to face with a young woman about the same age I had been when everything first broke apart. She held out a crumpled notebook, her hands trembling. "You made me believe it's possible," she said. I smiled then, real and wide and a little broken around the edges. and signed the inside cover of her notebook with a hand that didn't shake anymore. Outside, the night was freezing and beautiful. The city lights blurred into constellations. The future stretched ahead, uncharted and vast. And I was ready. The months after the summit unfolded like the slow bloom of spring after a brutal winter. Carter Technologies signed new contracts, grew our internship program, and quietly expanded our reach into industries that once wouldn't return our calls. We didn't explode overnight. We didn't chase virality or glossy magazine spreads. We grew like old trees do, steady, unseen by the impatient, inevitable to those who know how to wait. The office walls filled with photos of our interns graduating into full-time engineers, of client projects launching, of community workshops where girls who looked like the one I used to be asked hard, brilliant questions with fire in their eyes. I hung those photos with the same care some people reserve for diplomas or awards, because to me they were more precious. They were proof, not just that we survived, but that we planted seeds deep enough to outlive the storms. Sophia visited once that spring, standing awkwardly in the lobby with a bouquet of daisies clutched tight in one hand. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. She just handed me the flowers and said, "I'm proud of you." It wasn't a fix. It wasn't a repair. But it was a start. And sometimes that's all you can ask for from the people who once watched you drown without reaching for the rope. We had coffee at a little place around the corner from the office, catching up in fits and starts, both of us careful not to tug too hard at the stitched-together fabric of something tentatively healing. We talked about work, about books, about the stupid things we missed about childhood before ambition and expectation got their teeth in us. And when she left, hugging me too tight, I realized I didn't feel that old tug of wanting more anymore. I didn't need her to be sorry. I didn't need her to fix it. I had already built the closure myself. By the time summer rolled in, thick and golden, Carter Technologies prepared to open a second office, this time in a city that had once felt too big to dream about. I stood in the doorway of the new space on move-in day, cardboard boxes piled high around me, the air smelling like dust and promises. The team buzzed around me, laughing, arguing about where to put the break room and who got the desk by the window. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound of them wash over me, and smiled. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because it was ours. Built by hands that had been told to fold, built by voices that had been told to hush, built by hearts that refused to stop beating, no matter how many doors slammed shut. And somewhere between the laughter and the chaos and the soft thud of boxes being dropped onto hardwood floors, I realized I hadn't just survived the worst they could throw at me. I had outgrown it. I used to believe that survival was enough, that breathing through the wreckage and calling it life meant you had won somehow. But survival, I learned, is just the beginning. The real victory comes quietly, long after the shouting has stopped, in the spaces where no one is watching. It comes in the choice to keep building when no one is clapping, in the decision to love your work, your people, your life, without needing it validated by the ones who once doubted you. I don't think about Titan Tech much anymore. I don't replay old betrayals like broken records. Their absence from my story feels less like a wound and more like a closed door in a house I no longer live in. I don't need their apology. I don't need their regret. I don't even need their memory. I have this. A life crafted deliberately, stubbornly, lovingly, from the pieces they never thought would matter. I have a team that laughs louder than fear. I have a name stitched into the foundations of something I can be proud of, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And every morning, when I open my eyes to a world I helped carve from disappointment and hope, I remind myself, I wasn't just supposed to survive them. I was meant to outgrow them. And I did.